One of the standout episodes of Doctor Who Series 1 was the Empty Child two-parter by Stephen Moffat, which introduced Captain Jack Harkness as the Doctor and Rose fought terrifying gas mask zombies in World War II. After the runaway success of that story, Moffat was asked to return for Series 2, initially planning a story about a library in space with portals to other libraries throughout history, which is menaced by angelic stone statue monsters. This didn't come to pass, but the elements would still be spread throughout his next 3 stories: the time windows in The Girl in the Fireplace, the statues in Blink, and lastly the library in Series 4's Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead. However, before writing on the story began, Russell T Davies approached Moffat with an incredible opportunity, taking over as Doctor Who showrunner. Since this two-parter would be his last contribution as a regular writer, Moffat wanted to encourage fans to look forward to his time in charge, so he introduced the enigmatic Professor River Song, a figure from the Time Lord's future. Often heralded as one of the best Doctor Who stories of all time, was this swan song able to balance all of its many moving parts, or does it buckle under its many Moffatisms?
Spoilers.
The start of Silence in the Library is very fantastical and Moffat-esque. Dr. Moon talking to a little girl about her imaginary library as she flies around this sprawling city. I think it kind of sets the blueprint for the fairy tale nature of Series 5, but here it's a lot darker, with a real sense of panic as something tries to get into the room. She communicates this fear really well because we expect it to be some monster or evil alien, but instead it's a nice subversion, just the Doctor and Donna charging in, although they're clearly running from something themselves.
There's always a bigger fish.
This opening reminds me a bit of Girl in the Fireplace because it's in media res, landing us in the middle of the action just to then hop back to the beginning and build back up to it. It's also an outside look at our familiar duo, seeing them as complete strangers through this little girl's eyes. We're so used to following their adventures, but now we're in her perspective. Just a nice twist on the usual cold open format. Instead of following the Doctor and Donna running from something and bumping into the girl, we see it from a different, fresh angle, which also kind of goes to show how omniscient she is in her computer world, able to see everything going on in her library even when intruders arrive like this. Although, I wonder how exactly they got in.
How did he get in? In through the window?
Because they're in a library, the Doctor geeks out about books, gushing over how good they are and how they manage to last forever, even if the technology advances past paper. Yeah, take that, Kindle. I do like this because there's a certain novelty in books that make them timeless. The Doctor points out the smell, but there's also just the feeling of holding it in your hands. This entire world with lives and stories to tell, all fitting inside your palm. There's something very special about the medium, especially as the previous episode showed how long books are popular for, so it doesn't feel like some premise that will become super dated once the Autoblow MX4000B Gold series comes out with injectable novels. You even see it these days with the collectors of vinyl and the literal masochists who collect cassette tapes. Seriously, cassette tapes died for a reason. Stop trying to bring them back. They're terrible. I also really adore the setting of a planet-sized library. Sure, it borrows from the Star Wars playbook of planets with a singular gimmick, but when you're this far in the future with so many civilizations and spacefaring species, it's inevitable for the planets to feel smaller and become more like utilities. The most common presentation of this idea is the classic garbage dump planet, but it also makes sense that places like the library would exist as well, because you need somewhere to store all these books. The scale of it is simply unimaginable, which makes it incredible sci-fi, just unable to comprehend how many books there must be. You know, it would probably take a couple of hours for you to put the Bible in fiction, so it becomes a bit of a tough prank to do, so good luck with that. We then get the word to basically sum up the two-parter. Spoilers. Donna tries reading a random book only for the Doctor to lecture at her about reading ahead, despite, taking her in the first place because he has a time machine. I mean, Donna has already been spoiled that the human race will have an empire across 3 galaxies, fueled by the slavery of the Ood, so I don't really think it matters if she skips the last page of Lord of the Zogbats' Return of Clinpit. However, the Doctor has been in this position before, all the way back in the long game. Adam used the time travel privileges to read ahead about human advancements, deciding to try and beam all the information back to his time and benefit from it. Obviously, the Doctor wasn't too happy about this plan, so he wants to make sure nothing like that ever happens again, especially not with a good friend like Donna. It's a good moment of responsibility for the character, although he realises seconds later that something is wrong, because there's nobody on this entire planet, so he's already made a bit of a blunder with his no major events policy. Also, yes, I feel like I have to mention this line.
Maybe it's a Sunday.
No, I never land on Sundays. Sundays are boring.
The irony of the Chibnall era airing on Sundays is not lost on me. However, it always gives me chills when they scan for lifeforms and find over 1 million, which is an unimaginably high number. They're in this completely silent, desolate place, not a soul to be seen, but there are so many lifeforms apparently all around them. It's utterly chilling, especially because Donna accidentally suggests the truth.
I mean, it can't be the books, can it? I mean, books can't be alive.
The moment is played for jokes, but I think it's smart seeding by Moffat, because technically the books are alive. They're the cause of the Vashta Nerada through all the spores and paper, so it's very clever to seed this right from the beginning. There's also that really creepy scene as they talk to the Spoonhead computer terminal with its warnings about the shadows. Moffat puts in some enjoyable deadpan humour here, but it's very haunting because it furthers the mystery, telling us that there's something dangerous and deadly going on. The idea of scary shadows is a very simple but effective one. At some point in our lives, we all get scared of the dark for at least one moment, not wanting to step into the shadows, although we don't know why. Moffat as a writer loves to weaponize these simple everyday fears, and this is probably his most successful usage of it. All this beginning tells us is that people need to stay out of the shadows and to count them, which is all we need to hear this early on. We don't need to see anything yet, we just need to know there's something sinister about the dark, which is solidified by even the Doctor sounding a bit afraid of the warnings.
Donna,
Yeah.
stay out of the shadows.
Although they then proceed to walk right into the shadows, which is a bit of a weird oversight. Because this fear of shadows has been introduced, the lights going out in the aisle has a lot of stakes to it. We know they can't be caught in the darkness, so the burst of action is gratifying and exciting, along with finally tying up the cold open by showing us their point of view, revealing the little girl to actually be a security camera. I really like this mini twist. Mainly because I love the game Soma, and this is very reminiscent of the moral conundrum of that story. She's alive in her own little world, but the Doctor and Donna see her as a security camera, so there's a great aspect of dissonance in there, humanity contrasting robotics with these two very different perspectives. It's explored further when he calls the data core, showing up on her TV, continually establishing and building this mystery of who she is and what her relation to the library is, because she can even throw books around like it's some kind of theme park ride. However, just in case you forgot about the shadows, the Doctor notices a big triangular shadow being cast by nothing. This is so visceral and unsettling, because at first it seems like no big deal, like, yeah, it's just a shadow, probably being cast by... and then the penny drops, because the light source is the sun through a giant dome, meaning this shadow is impossible. I spoke before about not needing to see anything to get the point across, but it's executed nicely here, visually representing that threat of the shadows and how they're living. They can move around despite being shadows. We then get the rundown of the shadows and what they really are, Vashta Nerada. Sorry, couldn't resist. I love this leitmotif so much. It appears a lot throughout the story and I enjoy it every time. I do appreciate that the Doctor addresses that innate fear of the dark, like I mentioned earlier. He explains this fear is because the Vashta Nerada have the potential to be in every shadow, a constant threat that lives on the fringes of every life on every world, even our own. It's a great use of the fear as a justification for the monster's existence, along with the Doctor once again flexing their universal knowledge, because he immediately knows what they are. Given that he claims the monsters are in so many shadows, you'd expect he's met them before in some form or other. Which, yeah, Big Finish has done twice. And of course, it was related to the Time War, because why not? Then a group of astronauts come storming in all sinister-like, only for us to find out they're archaeologists led by the enigmatic River Song, who seems a bit too quirky and brazen to be another regular human side character. This is a good scene with a solid back and forth as the Doctor tries to get them to leave, knowing the horrors within the shadows. I feel like I've spoken a lot before about the authority of the character, how they always assume command and take charge of the situation, directing people, but it's another example of it here. Not even 5 minutes after meeting these people, he's commanding them to seal up doorways and other things. He just slips into this role so quickly and naturally, not being held to any regulations or contracts. The Doctor just does what the Doctor wants.
Torch, you're taking orders from him.
Spooky, isn't it?
However, instead of the TARDIS taking them off course or the Doctor landing somewhere by mistake, it turns out he came here on purpose because he had a message on his psychic paper. This was a framing device previously used in New Earth, So I like its reuse here because it initially sets up a great mystery as to who sent this message. It actually turns out to have been River, who seems to know the Doctor very well, pulling out a diary and listing off many adventures she claims to have had with him, only for him to stare blankly back at her because he's never met her before. In my Girl in the Fireplace review, I spoke about how it gets hurt upon revisiting because of the Moffatisms and similar plots to later stories. However, this story, specifically this scene, actually benefits substantially because of these later adventures with River in the Moffat era of the show. Probably one of the only good things his overuse of the character has ever led to. Once you have that foresight, this moment becomes incredibly poignant and emotional. River realising this is the first time the Doctor has ever met her, a moment she has been fearing for a long time in her life, as later shown in The Impossible Astronaut.
The day's coming when I'll look into that man's eyes. My Doctor. And you won't have the faintest idea who I am.
She's all playful and flirty with him, but now she realises where exactly he is in their shared timeline. She's at the end, even if he's at the beginning, because, you know, time travel and all that. I just find it very powerful, especially because it's only their first proper scene together in the story. There are plenty more to come, including him becoming the one to be told not to peek into a book because of spoilers, mirroring that earlier warning to Donna.
Sorry, you're not allowed to see inside the book. It's against the rules.
What rules?
Your rules.
One of the many things I've been saying throughout these reviews is Donna's sense of humanity. She is the human companion after all. They kind of need a sense of humanity, otherwise they become Series 2 Rose and nobody wants that. One of the many ways her human nature shines through here is going to the effort of being friendly to Miss Evangelista, who gets bullied and ignored by her crewmates for being more looks than intelligence, which, you know, is kind of like a lot of influences when you think about it. It's never nice to be excluded or looked down upon, and Donna sees how the others are treating Evangelista, so she just wants to raise her spirits, make her feel better. I think it shows how far Donna herself has come as a character since she became a full-time companion. She's no big brain herself, so she can relate somewhat, but travelling with the Doctor has taught her a lot of compassion for others. I honestly don't think Runaway Bride Donna would do this, because she was such a completely different character back then. However, the crew's ignorance of Evangelista ultimately costs her her life, because she wanders into a room and dies, having been brushed off when trying to alert the others. Like the shadow from earlier, this is a way to up the threat of the Vashta Nerada, and show how dangerous they really are. A visual representation of what will happen to someone who goes into the shadows. They'll just get instantly shredded like this, and I don't mean the muscular kind. However, the most important thing it does is set up the idea of data ghosts, a person's last moments recorded within their suit. This alone is a great concept for a Doctor Who story, because it poses a lot of moral questions about whether this still counts as them being alive, along with technology possibly going too far because it's a pretty twisted concept. Donna having to talk to Evangelista's dying consciousness as she slowly loops into her final death. It's a phenomenal scene that achieves so much, not only pitching this complex, terrifying idea, but also laying the building work for River's survival at the end. River has a scene with Donna where she explains her complex timeline in a very Moffat-y sense, constantly talking in riddles and vague sentences about the Doctor seeing through her. I absolutely detest when she does this in the Moffat era of the show, but I really like it here, although that's probably just because Donna's there to call her out on it.
What are you talking about? Are you just talking rubbish? Do you know him or don't you?
This conversation also gives us a hint towards Donna's tragic future, since River doesn't know her, only the name, reacting like she's seeing a ghost because she obviously knows what's yet to come with Donna's mind being wiped. That's the problem with time travel. Everyone is a ghost, and Donna for once is like a character in a historical episode. River already knows what will happen, like the Doctor knew what would happen with Caecilius back in Pompeii. Only this time, River can't do anything to stop the Doctor's future from happening. However, to get out of this narrative cul-de-sac, there's that ingenious moment as the Vashta Nerada completely demolish a chicken drumstick, showing in motion how Evangelista died. The Doctor also mentions how common these monsters are, they're even on Earth in small quantities. I think this is a very good way to bring the threat home and give it a sense of proximity. It's basically Moffat saying the Vashta Nerada could be real, and that's why some things and some people just disappear. It's the shadows getting them. This all gives you a sense of scale to work with. These shadow piranhas only hang around in small groups almost everywhere in the universe, living off roadkill and other small things. But here, they're a completely overwhelming infestation. Like the monitor at the beginning stated, there are well over a million of them here, so there's good reason to be scared. I also like that the Doctor lists off how to beat the big bad monsters like Daleks and Centaurans, but offers no alternative but running when it comes to these creatures. You know a monster is a big deal when even the Doctor can't stop them. All they can do is run away and hope for the best. And that's how you make an impact with your creation. That's how you make a monster scary. However, before they can just leave, the pilot Proper Dave finds himself with two shadows, becoming a victim of the Vashta Nerada. It reveals what the phrase "count the shadows" really means, because the second shadow is now the sign that you're dead, basically. This is such a sinking feeling, because it sucks any sense of safety away. They can't just walk away anymore. There's no way to flee. Although, that being said, I would have loved it if this was a single episode and they just managed to nope out and fly away. That would have been such a Moffat twist to pull. Instead, Proper Dave becomes a walking skeletal astronaut, now being puppeted by the swarm to chase them as a zombie. This is very reminiscent of The Empty Child, especially with the repeated phrase we all know and love.
Hey, who turned out the lights?
The build up to the first use of the phrase is utterly brilliant because it reaches back to that idea of the Data Ghost, Evangelista's death having been set up for this moment and the gimmick of the villain. Before Proper Dave dies, his visor blacks out so he seems to be fine, talking as normal, but then he starts to repeat sentences, so it's this really good penny drop to reveal his zombification, giving us that wonderful visual representing the Vashta Nerada, something to properly look at rather than just shadows. Silence in the library, like a lot of Moffat first parts, ends on a sublime cliffhanger. The Doctor sends Donna back to the TARDIS like he'd done with Rose in Parting of the Ways, just for Donna to seemingly die mid-teleport and the Doctor being cornered by the Vashta Nerada with no way out. Again, I think it's quite similar to The Empty Child. The protagonist backed into this corner by a swarm of monsters that will kill them with a single touch, but the stakes are so much higher now that we think Donna is dead. Not only did we have that moment of River hinting at a tragic future for Donna, the next time trailer also has no Donna in it. Obviously, from a common sense point of view, it's pretty obvious she's not dead, but it's a good ending, giving you a week of thinking that Donna is just gone for good. It's helped by the idea that River might be replacing her, because she came into the story with that history with the Doctor, clearly from his future and his companion at some point. Classic Who stories sometimes switch companions halfway through, so even established fans wouldn't immediately rule out the possibility here, especially because River's setup is similar to Mel in Trial of a Time Lord, in that she's from the future and already knows the Doctor, who doesn't know her. This concept means the first part ends on a strong note, making you really think and wait with bated breath for the next episode to get the answers, which, in my opinion, is exactly what a first part should do. However, as is the case with a lot of Doctor Who cliffhangers, the resolution basically comes as a very simple solution. River just using her Captain Jack square gun to shoot their way out. It's a pretty disappointing way to pay off that really high stakes ending to the first part, but it's done quickly enough to not really detract from the story itself. Then the story gets into really interesting territory, as we see Donna taken into a hospital meeting Dr. Moon, who has apparently been treating her for some undisclosed illness, although he dismisses the Doctor and all the adventures as mere dreams. Now I know this bait and switch, it was all a dream, but not really. Plot point is a massive cliche done millions of times, but I really respect how Moffat handles it in this episode, especially because Donna calls out how the events in the scene keep jumping conveniently, almost becoming a meta commentary on this stereotypical life montage charting her life. This is the right way to go about it because it presents that idea of things not being right. Dr. Moon almost dictating everything by shifting the narrative along as he sees fit, even wiping Donna's memory of her brief glimpse of the Doctor trying to break into the fictitious world. It puts Donna in this different reality to give her a very different journey than the Doctor, which allows the episode to cover more ground and switch itself up more effectively, River essentially playing the companion back in the library. Indeed, once they're safe from Mr. Skeletor Dave, there's an astounding character moment between River and the Doctor as she begs her team to trust him, even though he still doesn't trust her yet. I've already spoken about the talking in riddles, but I do think it works well here. It gives you a proper sense as to how well she knows him, how long she's known him. It's easy to look back at this episode and go, oh yeah, it's River. But this was her very first appearance in the show's universe. Both Moffat and Alex Kingston had an uphill battle to communicate River's history of the Doctor, making her seem credible to the audience and get you to understand her place in the universe. This scene does that brilliantly in my opinion, especially as he confronts her for being so enigmatic. You can understand his frustration. Not only is he up against an unbeatable threat and thinks his companion is dead, but he also has to deal with this random woman with a sonic screwdriver claiming to have known him for an incredibly long time. It's all well and good her telling him she's from his future, but he has no way to know that. He has no reason to trust her. So I think David Tennant is good at communicating this confusion and these difficult emotions. It's especially good as River whispers something in his ear to get him to trust her, the sudden stinger of the Doctor's theme, as you see shock and realization come over his face. It later turns out she whispered his name, which makes this moment so groundbreaking. Just having the screwdriver and all these riddles wasn't a proper way to verify her, but this is. We know how secretive the Doctor is about their name. They never say it, never let anyone know it, but for some reason, River does. It's that final nail we need to see how significant she is, because if she wasn't incredibly important to him, she wouldn't know such a deeply personal and hidden detail, so it makes a lot of sense that he'd finally trust her after this moment, although it still does leave him speechless. However, the shadows strike again to claim Anita, despite the Doctor's terrible plan of dimming her helmet to trick the swarm. It's like someone putting a printed out picture of a half-eaten burger over an actual burger to try and trick you into thinking you've already eaten it. That would never work. However, we do get that eerie moment as the Doctor realises proper Dave is caught up with them, lurking behind them in all his skeletal glory. It's a tense little moment to get them back on the move and under threat again. The Doctor tries to reason with the Vasto Narada, who used a neural relay in the suit to talk to him. Now, because these aren't weeping angels, I very much like this way of communicating with the invisible, mute threat. In any story like this, you need the motivations of the monster. You need to understand why they're doing what they're doing, and this is very effective for that. In their usual form, there's no way to have this establishment, but the neural relays are a smart way to get them talking since they've been spamming the loops each time they kill, so they can do it. Through this, we learn that they came through spores in the books, because the trees in the forest they live in were cut down to make all this paper, bringing them and causing this infestation. This bombshell is a wonderful, shocking realization. It all makes perfect sense and it's a nice subversion of the usual tropes. Usually it would be that they hitched a ride on a ship or they were on a meteor which crashed, but this is nice and simple. They just came in the books, essentially stolen from their own worlds and stranded here. Like Donna suggested at the start of the story, the books are alive and deadly. Then, because there are too many characters still alive, other Dave joins the skeleton crew, which the Doctor doesn't notice for a short while, but you can hear it in the sound cues, which I just think is very clever.
There are no trees in a library.
You should go. Doctor!
Whilst the Doctor is buccaneering along, climbing under bridges like Lara Croft, River has another great scene as she expands upon her Doctor from the future. I do like this idea of her coming across the wrong incarnation, having expected the next one along. It takes that basic idea of the time traveller's wife and ups the drama, because this is more than just a time traveller. This is a Time Lord with dozens of lives, dozens of faces. What she might consider to be the Doctor could be completely different from all the other incarnations, and this is suggested in this scene. Her almost considering him a lesser incarnation because he's not the one she knows. She even says a line that's accidentally aged pretty terribly because of the toxic fanbase.
But not my Doctor.
Uh-oh. However, I like that it sets up this idea of him having to almost prove himself to her. River not even acknowledging that he's the Doctor, even though, you know, he is. She has all these preconceptions of what he should be based on the 11th Doctor, and won't accept anyone else. It's kind of relatable because as fans we go through similar crises when we meet a different incarnation. A new Doctor comes along and we go, but they're not the one I like, and then we get all upset about it. And don't lie, everyone has had that at least once. They're either too old, too fat, too thin, or too young. They're too human, not human enough, too peaceful, too violent, you get the gist. This is basically River just upset it's not the Doctor she expected, and that's okay, it's a very smart narrative. Besides, we all know which one she was really expecting.
I'm a doctor. But probably the one you're expecting.
Back in Donna's world, we get a continuation of the idea that things aren't as they seem. Her saying she's tired only to be suddenly teleported into her room. I really like how she tries hard to fill the gaps, desperate to have it all make sense. It's like she's in a dream state, things just shifting around because dreams don't need to make sense. Things happen and you just accept them.
It's like a thing, isn't it? People don't question things, they just think, it's a thing.
Donna feels like this is all real and wants to make sense of it, which leads to these kinds of rationalizations, wanting to make herself comfortable within the narrative and not question her reality. However, then a creepy cloaked figure posts a mysterious message before slinking away into the darkness. This is the first proper sign that things are actually wrong. Before, this world and everyone in it was shown as perfect, some kind of paradise. But here's suddenly something creepy and irregular, so it's spooky. It eventually turns out to be Miss Evangelista, coming out and addressing the weird dream timing. She explains how fake this world is, that every child is the same and everyone in the world is someone from the library, and this is just somewhere to store them. I love the reveal of the children all being identical. The camera work as Donna entered the playground had been smart to not show the other children there, so this moment is a real shock and horrifying realization, especially as Donna rips her veil off to reveal Evangelista's distorted and mangled face because her upload was botched. I think this fakeness continues that Soma concept I've mentioned a few times. In order to save everyone, the library created this entire fake world to keep them safe until they can return. It has thousands of trapped souls living these dreamlike lives. So, are they real, or are they literally ghosts in the machine? It's a fantastic concept to explore, and as I said, it could be its own entire story, exploring this morality in existence. They're all stored in this computer somewhere in the library. No matter how hard Donna tries to deny it and run from it, that's where she is, and who she is now. And they're about to die.
Mummy, what's wrong with the sky?
Because Lux's family stupidly put a child as the sentient computer at heart of a planet, she throws a tantrum, deleting Dr. Moon and initiating the self-destruct sequence, with a convenient 20-minute timer because there are 20 minutes left in the episode. Wait, we sure this isn't a Chibnall episode? I do think the logic within the universe is a bit stupid, because you should never entrust a child with this much power. But I guess Lux is now realising how stupid that move from his family was. It all forms a good race against time as the Doctor and co travel to the core of the planet to find the computer, whilst Donna's reality continues to crumble, including her children suddenly vanishing. I really feel for Donna in this moment. Even though she knows deep down this was all virtual reality, this is still her family. It all still feels real to her regardless of the truth. She formed a deep and loving bond with her kids despite everything happening in such a short span of time. To her, this is her reality now, and it's being torn away from her. And to get back to the Soma idea I keep whittering on about, this is a completely different version of Donna. It's not one-to-one. This is a data reconstruction in the cloud made out of numbers. So when Donna returns to the physical world, this version will die, which is just terrifying to think about. It's a 50-50 chance of which version she'll be, because one will live and one will die, so I think there's some real horror in this. The Doctor then decides they can pull everyone out of the simulation and rescue them if he plugs himself into the computer to give some extra brain power to the process. But even with a big brain immortal like the Doctor, this would be a fatal sacrifice, burning up his hearts and preventing regeneration. I mainly love this scene for his reaction to Anita's death. She's been plagued by the Vashta Nerada for most of the episode, but somehow hasn't died. Although the Doctor clocks onto her actual death the moment she starts interrogating him about his plans to make the Swarm an offer. His suppressed anger is great, because it's another life he wasn't able to save. Another person who lost their life as a consequence of his adventures, his crusade. One of my favourite scenes of the 10th Doctor era is this moment where the shadows start to close in on him, but he's angry, not scared. He's trying to negotiate a good deal with them, and they're just killing everyone around him. He has that patented 10th Doctor edge here, and he actually becomes the Doctor River alluded to.
I've seen whole armies turn and run away.
I'm the Doctor, and you're in the biggest library in the universe. Look me up.
This flash of darkness is frankly wonderful, and Tennant does a brilliant job portraying this furious, deity-like figure, not even needing a weapon or a threat to scare away this endless swarm of vicious monsters. All he needs to do is tell them who he is, and that's enough. Which is very much how Moffat often characterised the 11th Doctor. I do like that this is a story where the Doctor doesn't beat the threat, he just survives. It's not a case of winning or conquering evil, he just convinces the Vashta Nerada to let everyone go, surrendering the planet to them because there's no actual way to defeat them, which is a much appreciated change of pace.
Vashta Nerada, Run. Just run.
However, rather than letting the Doctor burn himself up, River knocks him out and takes his place. Although she wouldn't need to do that with the 13th Doctor, as shown with Koshamus. As with all the 10 River scenes, I really like this moment. It's so emotional and touching. River realising the Doctor always knew how her story would end. Every adventure they had, he knew she'd end up here. I just think that's such a heart-wrenching thought, and it's very representative of the suffering of the Doctor. He never gets a chance to see River properly. He always sees this moment every time he meets her. Just like River seeing Donna as a ghost because she knows her ending, he must always see River as a constant spectre marching ever closer to her death, and he can never tell her, never even hint at it, although he did allow himself to send her off with a night at the Singing Towers. It's such a great goodbye, him still not knowing who she really is, or why his future self gave her the sonic screwdriver. He's just helpless as she sacrifices herself. She even refuses to let him go all Time Lord victorious mode by rewriting time to save her, because it would stop their life together from ever happening. All the times he sacrificed himself for others in similar situations, now he has to watch as she takes his place in this emotional sacrifice. Much like Jenny dying, he's losing this link to his own identity. No way to reverse or to stop it. It's moments like these that make him probably the second most tortured incarnation behind the 8th Doctor, who really had a rough time.
You are a part of this, Doctor, whether you like it or not.
I would rather die.
You're dead already. How many more will you let join you?
The ending is really bittersweet. Everyone returned to the library safe and sound, but at the cost of River's life and Donna's perfect love life. The sun is shining on a new dawn, but once again the Doctor has lost someone very important to him. Another person dying in his name, and you can tell how much pain he's feeling as a result of it, internalising this frustration and emotion. However, I do like how he's tempted to look in the diary. After all, the laws of time will obey him. It's a perfect mirror of the opening of Silence in the Library, this natural temptation to peek ahead for spoilers, especially because Donna wants to know why she seems to disappear from the Doctor's life despite her wanting to stay forever. It's good resolve for them to put the diary down and walk away, since it would just be, well, spoilers. However, one of the best parts is the Doctor running back because he's still not over the whole screwdriver thing. Like River said, their whole time together he knows she's destined for this death. He knows himself well enough to know his future self would have taken that time to do something to save her, although that's mainly just because Moffat can't bear to let people die. Yes, it turns out that he put one of the neural relays into the screwdriver to save her data ghost. I think this refusal to accept death is very in line with the characterisation of the Doctor over the course of the Davies era. Time after time he's had to see people die and he's had enough of not being able to save them. It's similar to Astrid in Voyage of the Damned, except this time he can save River, even if it is a Pyrrhic victory. I just love the ending of Forest of the Dead. This triumphant denial of the rules as the Doctor forever blasts. River narrating the Doctor's stubbornness as she's resurrected within the data core. She and her crew are all dressed in white, giving it an ethereal, heavenly sense, with River being given an afterlife of sorts. Although, if you go by Soma rules, she had a 50-50 chance of being the consciousness that got there. Because it's a copy, the other consciousness would have still died within her body. Then the Doctor snaps his fingers to open the TARDIS. This moment is him taking the step forward, continuing his slow transformation into River's Doctor, the one she truly loves and considers the Doctor. It's all part of that bittersweet ending, this new leap forward in his life, excited for those adventures with River. I'm in two minds about her ending though. On one hand, it's great for that Moffat characterisation for the Doctor. How he hates endings, he hates seeing the people around him die, so every now and then, when he can, he'll break the rules and make everyone live, even if there is a big old asterisk next to it. However, much like Girl in the Fireplace, this ending suffers from already knowing Moffat tropes. One of the biggest criticisms of the Grand Moff is that he always brings dead characters back, undermining their death in the first place, and that definitely makes River's ending a bit frustrating when you revisit it, because it's one of his many walkbacks after an important character death. But overall, I think it's a bittersweet yet triumphant ending to such a distressing and claustrophobic story, really paying everything off very well. Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead are two highly acclaimed episodes of Doctor Who, and for very good reason. It's basically the perfect Doctor Who story. There's a really imaginative setting with this sprawling citywide library, and the monster is one of the most creative and creepy in the history of the show. Something so widespread and vicious that even the Doctor can't beat it, creating a great story of desperate survival against the darkness that surrounds them. One of those perfect one-off monsters that make you fear something so incredibly normal. River is also a unique and fantastic presence in the narrative. She's an opportunity to explore the realism of the Doctor's wild, time-travelling lifestyle, a figure from his future that neither he nor the audience knows about, so she's a really interesting mystery to explore. Even outside of the main story, the subplot of Donna in the Data Core has a lot of intrigue and potential behind it. There's so much to explore with that concept, and it gives Donna a very chilling side story to experience, breaking down how we perceive life and the reality of our own world. I know it's definitely overrated, but that won't stop me from giving this two-parter a shining S rank on the Series 4 tier list. I couldn't really justify giving it any lower because it's that good. It's simply one of the best out there, and it barely puts a foot wrong. It has everything you want out of a modern Doctor Who story, with its thrilling and pulpy, action-packed story. It's instantly memorable with so many moving parts that somehow don't get in each other's way or hurt the story. There's an incredible score by Murray Gold that ties everything about the story up into a neat bow of slick perfection. The tone of the two-parter is a brilliantly jarring contrast to the light-hearted and comedic Unicorn and the Wasp, so it sets the darker tone for the rest of Series 4, along with a lot of the writing being set up for Moffat's reign as showrunner, especially with the constant spamming of River Song, beating her into the ground and making her one of my least favourite characters of all time, how her character was completely destroyed and turned into a caricature personification. And I'd like to give a very special thank you to my gold level patrons: Alex Marston, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, John, and Stephanie Never Miller. Thank you so much for your support.